And it was very difficult to say, all this goes away when you go to Epicor, and then we're just going to take your Excel files and throw them in the dumpster, right? Because if I said that to that person who spends that much time every day or once a week, whatever it is, on those Excel files, that's that process, and they built those files to get this done to make their life easier. If I don't offer the solution to them at that point, they're going to be very weary of what's coming ahead.
Hey Brian, how's it going, buddy?
Pretty good, Jose. How you doing?
Doing great. How was your week?
The week was good. Got a site visit into a facility I haven't been to before. Brandon got to come with us this time on a trip, so we got to see Brandon again for the second time in a couple of weeks.
Cool.
And I also got to see a Paul McCartney concert this week.
Oh, I heard that he puts on a great show. How was that?
That was awesome. So I've seen Paul McCartney 3 times. He comes out, tells a lot of good Beatles stories if you're a Beatles fan.
Hmm.
He turns 80 this weekend, and he can still run circles around most of us. So
Wow.
that's pretty impressive. And he had Bruce Springsteen join him. So that was
Oh, wow. So yeah, they're
big
both.
hit in the concert. Concert was in New Jersey, so that was a big hit to have Springsteen out there on stage. And well, funny story from that is, when he came out, everybody was yelling Bruce, and afterwards, Paul McCartney goes, "Oh, good." He goes, "I figured out halfway through the song they were yelling Bruce." He goes, "I thought they were booing us." So
Oh
he
no.
wasn't used to used to the way New Yorkers cheer for people around here. So
Right.
they would never boo Bruce Springsteen in New Jersey. So but a
Right.
good
No,
show.
that's
I
interesting.
am exhausted. It's a long week.
I bet. Yeah, with traveling and concerts, you're just everywhere this week.
Yep.
Um, yeah. So what do we have in the way of news this week? I think our buddy Hasso released the new schema for Kinetic 2021, which everybody always gets really excited about. So we appreciate him doing that. He put it out there on EpiUsers. So if you want to figure out how everything talks to each other and how all the table connects, go out there and take a look at that. So obviously we appreciate Hasso for doing that. I also was doing some reading on LinkedIn trying to keep up with the news, and I saw that Epicor is actually moving their headquarters, apparently across the street from where they are. So that's not much of, you know, the news is not that big. But I was like, I saw a message from somebody that was like, "Oh, last day at the office," and I was like, "Wait, is Epicor moving out of Texas?" But no, they're just moving across the street, which
Well,
it's
hopefully
cool.
it's an upgrade for them and their employees are happier and they build us better things.
That's right. Yes, build us better things.
Build us better things. It's all about us, right? All about the customer. Build us better
Of
things.
course, all about the customer. So what are we doing this week? I thought we had a guest last week or last time, and I figured that we were trying to schedule a guest for this week, but that didn't work out. So we're gonna have to postpone that a little bit. And we thought, we are doing a lot of implementations here at Stephen Gould, and you have been doing implementations for a long, long time. You have a lot of experience, and you did a presentation at Insights about how to successfully do an implementation using the signature methodology. And I thought, let's have a conversation about that because I really think it's important that that us as customers, implement Epicor correctly. The only way to be successful in an ERP is to implement it correctly. You can bring an ERP in and spend millions of dollars and like Andy likes to say, and cost millions of lives. But if you don't implement it correctly, you're not going to get your money out of it. So I don't know. I thought we could have a little conversation about that. What do you think?
Sounds fun. Sounds fun. Let's do it. Where do you want to start?
Let's start at the beginning. What is the Epicor signature methodology?
So Epicor's signature methodology is really best practices in rolling out ERP across your company or your plant or whatever your scope is going to be. And really, when you look at the slide decks they have on this and they prescribe it, it's really a 5-stage project plan. And I'll be honest, it's really just project management 101. There really isn't a whole lot of extra thought and creativity put into this. It's really just, you know, best practices, goes through the 5 stages: prepare, plan, design, validate, deploy. They put in some guidance on structuring your team and roles, and your Epicor project team has a role in the project. Your team has a role in the project. Building out functional leaders, subject matter experts, making sure that the right people are in the right places. And they sprinkle in some Epicor specific processes like a business process review, some stage validations, proof of concepts, and most important to me at the end, a support transition where we are not reliant on your consultant and your implementation staff for your cutover, right?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the building of a team, and I think that's very important. I also the part about the business process review. I think you know, a lot of people do not take the time to do a proper business process review, and we have found in our experience, both at Stephen Gould and prior, that if you don't do a good business process review, you really can end up shooting yourself in the foot. So, what's your approach for that? What's your approach towards doing a business process review correctly?
So, Jose, typically before we get to BPR, we're building out that project team. We're finding out the subject matter experts and starting to plan out for that process review, who's going to be in the room and how we're going to conduct that. So we're building out that team ahead of time. Also, just a quick note on building out your team. Epicor is going to, or any consulting group, if you're using a partner or using Epicor directly, they're going to offer some consultants, and you should always make sure those consultants are a good fit for your group. They may have 5 ops consultants available, or maybe just one, or however the resource scheduling is working out for them. You should always interview them as if they're going to be part of your team. Make sure they're a good fit. If you need somebody who's going to give you some stronger guidance or a softer approach or whatever's going to best fit your team, you want to make sure those consultants are going to be a good resource for you and help balance out some of your needs. The business process review is usually an on-site session that we do where it's all about, in our case, the sites that we're going to, right? We're not coming out there to do any Epicor education. We're staying away from Epicor commentary, and we're definitely avoiding changes that are going to affect the users because we don't want to scare them away, right? We've learned through some of our past experiences about becoming a trusted advisor, right? John Predich, that's his big thing, become a trusted advisor. And John, lectured a lot when we were consultants there, explained that process of becoming a trusted advisor. And the first step is listening, right? And make sure that the people you're working with, the team you're working with, knows that you have their back, that you're interested in what they have to say about things. And that's the business process review. That's where that starts. It's the first time on site. It's my favorite project activity. You get to go out there and you get to see all the things that they do in the warehouse. You get to meet their team. How do they do this? What are they building? It's an exciting time in the project, right? You usually get to go out for a great dinner afterwards. But during that process review, it's important to make sure your team knows it is about them and it's not about Epicor. We're not going to talk about what we want to change or what we could potentially change. You want to hear from them how they do things, honest answers. Just tell us, because we're going to have to map it to Epicor somehow. So just tell us what you do. No judgment. They tell you that they do some crazy thing and there's 19 Excel spreadsheets involved. Just smile knowing you're going to get rid of it and just write down the answers, and you're going to come back later with that change management path, that gap analysis. You're also going to validate some of those team selections. That's why I want to talk about the team and building up your team before you go into the BPR, because you're going to interview all those people on their process and make sure that they're going to represent a group behind them for the shipping or order entry or finance. And so you want to make sure that they represent the group as a whole and have the right people and enough people. Maybe you didn't invite enough people from finance or enough people from the warehouse, and having them included in discussion and make sure that you understand all the processes involved. Right?
Yeah, that's very important. And one thing that I've learned from you more recently is that you cannot introduce change when you're trying to do this process review. And you've kind of made fun of me in the past because I go visit a site and I'm immediately like, oh, we can do this. Oh, we can do that. Oh, we can change this. And we've had the conversation, and you've explained to me that we don't want to scare them off, and we don't want to start trying to solution something when we don't fully understand their process. So that's something that we're really taken to heart, and I think that it's great advice because you kind of get wrapped up on what you know, and you really need to focus on what they know and what they're trying to demonstrate and show you, and you get to learn the business. I mean, that's one of the more fun things. And I know I harass you all the time about, hey Bryan, when can my team get out there? And you're like, well, not yet. You can go a little later, but I just love going on site and learning the business because as IT guys, we're all always, in the office and in the back end. And it's really nice to to get on there and see what they do, and you can immediately see the things that you can improve with Epicor or with whatever software you're implementing. Um, but it is important that you keep that kind of in the back of your head, like you said, for
Absolutely.
when you become and you come up with, you go to solutioning, and then you can kind of wow them with those solutions. But you don't want to introduce change from the get-go. That's something that's very important.
We recently did a process review where somebody showed us this giant Excel process they had to process customers' orders and inventory management and some things. It's very, very heavy in Excel. And we felt bad for this person watching them go through that. And it was very difficult to say, all this goes away when you go to Epicor, and then we're just going to take your Excel files and throw them in the dumpster, right? Because if I said that to that person who spends that much time every day or once a week, whatever it is, on those Excel files, that's that process, and they built those files to get this done to make their life easier. If I don't offer the solution to them at that point, they're going to be very weary of what's coming ahead. Are they going to take my stuff away, but how are they going to replace it? Are they going to cover everything that I mentioned that I use them for? So it's important to slow down and just listen and write down the answers. And you know what? You have a Christmas present for them coming ahead. You're going to make their life easier, but just introduce that change for them when they're ready. As far as introducing that change, I typically wouldn't come back with business process review and gap analysis results. I do those in the same time, and I score it in an Excel file. We have a template that we've used with 600 questions and that kind of thing. Um, but when I don't like to come back and introduce those gap analysis results until we've gone through foundation education. And your foundation education is really some system flow. It's really about how Epicor works, all the capabilities that are in there, and what it's going to do for you, or what might change. Typically, when I come out of foundation education, by the time we get to gap analysis after education, that team is pretty much aware of the opportunities and the changes that are coming, and a lot of times they're excited about it. So those giant Excel files that are going away, by then they've seen the order entry screens in Epicor, and they're not trained on it, but they know how it works. You've shown them, they've clicked on a few things, and they get the idea of, well, there's some really cool tools in here that we can replace Excel with, right? I think somebody at Insights, maybe it was John Predich, I think the best quote from the whole week was, what does ERP stand for? And it was Excel Replacement Program. So I got a good chuckle out of that.
Yeah, I did too. It was, I think, yeah, I think you're right. I think it was John. And that kind of segues into, change management. So how do we want to approach that? I know that, that's something that we all struggle with, not only at Stephen Gould, but just in general. I mean, any change, even change management within ourselves. Like when I first saw Kinetic UI, it was a shock to the system, and I didn't like it, and I didn't want to do it, and the whole who moved my cheese kind of came into play, and obviously over time I've gotten used to it, and I have gotten accustomed to it, and now I see the benefits that it brings. But what is the best approach you think we should take for change management when implementing something as big as a new ERP system, or even just a simple upgrade?
Sure. Well, change management itself can be an entire presentation. So I'm not going to spend an hour talking about this. And actually, I think we were trying to get John Predich on to talk about change management because he is the professor on this. He takes me to school all the time. But as far as change, I like to deliver it in small doses. It needs to be communicated. I need to engage with your team. I mentioned the BPR and the gap analysis and introducing that change. I feel that educating people on the changes before you have those conversations and you say, hey, look, this is going to need to change. A lot of times it's easier to serve that change notification and deal with that. Sometimes it's bad news for them, or it's a difficult conversation to have. But you can plant some seeds in some of that education if you know it's coming, and you can prepare them for that. So a lot of times I try to get them to come up with the idea on their own, and maybe some of that is a little bit planted, but that's an approach that I typically take on it. But it is very important. Any plan in your project plan and the change management path, it's always best if you communicate it up front, and you let them know that, look, this is the goal of the project, and it's going to be some tough times. And be honest. I think Andy always says this. An ERP rollout is like a root canal. I mean, it's not fun. You get through it, and afterwards you're in a much better place, right? That's kind of the description of an ERP rollout.
Yeah, no, that's a good description. And I think if I had to pick what the nerve of that root canal is, it's going to be that data migration.
It depends.
I know that I hate that. I mean, that part of it is just taking, data that's been sitting in a system for 15, 20 years, that's being curated especially for that system, and just trying to push that into a new system can be so painful.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. The other thing about users, they all typically have their own concerns about the project themselves. It's, what's gonna happen to my job? Am I gonna be, are we gonna need less people after this? Am I getting eliminated? I've been the resource and the go-to in the office for this application for so long. We're gonna roll out a new program. I'm gonna lose that positional power or that expert power that I have here. What's gonna change there? Or sometimes people just expect a larger workload because there's this new thing coming along, and I'm expecting management to ask me to do more so they can see more. That's not always the case, right? So outlining some of those project goals and communicating with your team and engaging with them and working with smaller groups makes that a little easier too. So you can get to understand what some of the fears that those groups have.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we run into a lot is, people concerned that, oh, you're coming in here to replace my job.
Right.
And that's usually not the case. I mean, the goal of implementing ERP is to make the company more efficient, but it doesn't mean that we're going to replace people. Usually we move people to a different area, or just make their life easier in general. I mean, there's people whose entire job is to do one very specific difficult task, and if we can take that task and make it much simpler, then we can make their job more enjoyable, and give them an opportunity to move into different areas, and kind of learn other sides of the business. I know that's something that I always enjoy, is kind of putting my toe into some other areas that I'm not that familiar with.
Right.
And that's hard to do when your job keeps you 100% busy all the time, because you're just doing busy work to accommodate an old system that doesn't fit the
Yeah.
fit the bill
Some of
anymore.
the solutions that you and the rest of the development team with Brandon and Hannah have been able to do here with automations that have a Lara thing and our accounts receivable and now the accounts payable processes, that has really lightened the workload for these groups and taken a lot of heavy lifting from them and a lot of data entry away and automated things. And it's not that we automated away their jobs. It's made things easier. So now they can actually pay attention to what they're doing, make better decisions, and just have time to work through these things. So when we go out to all the sites and they've heard about some of the things that you guys have built to alleviate problems in some of the other facilities, they get excited, and they're like, sometimes we hear, hey, you think you can get the development team to take a look at this for us? And the answer is yes. As long as it's worth the effort and the uplift, we're happy to try and automate things for them if possible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It helps build morale too. If they know that something is coming that is going to be better, it always helps with that whole change management approach too.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
so what about testing? So how do we approach the testing strategy when you're implementing something like an ERP system? I mean, that seems like such a scary proposition to say, okay, let's turn on the new system and off we go. How does that come about? What do you think the best approach is for that?
So we do that in a couple of different stages in the project plan, Jose. So typically we go through our pilot is really a lot of times a demonstration early on. We're getting some data loads in there. We're starting to model out. After we've done some modeling and design work on the system, we're going to go through a pilot, and we're going to, the users aren't fully trained yet, and we're going to coach them through a lot of transactions. We're going to take some complicated business scenarios and hopefully some easy ones too. And we're going to run those through Epicor and test the design of the system. We're going to do that together. So that's really the first test of that. I would not call that a conference room pilot or end user testing. It's really just software design testing. And it's really before end user procedures are written. We're starting to maybe outline those out and taking some of those scenarios. Say, hey, we're going to do these things. This is the goal. Let's see how these flush through and go through some validation there. And during that process, we can repeat that as many times as we need to make sure that the design is correct. And maybe we get development involved there, or we have to rework some data that's been migrated. So that's one way to do that first test, right? After you pass through that, and you get through your end user training, your end user procedures are written up, you're having your end users trained, and then we like to go through that user acceptance test. And that's taking probably those same scenarios or similar scenarios and processing them through with a larger group, not just your project team. You're having your end users go through that. And that test at that point is validating the software again, but also validating that your team is ready to use the software. They need to prove that to the implementation team. It's really important, because if your team isn't ready to cut over, you shouldn't cut over, right? You need to make sure that they're ready to go.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've learned the hard way, both here and in the past, is don't have arbitrary cutover dates. You know, cutover when you're ready, not when you need to, when you think you need to be ready, right? Unless you have some impending project or something that's very important that you have to make a cutover for. And if that's the case, you should be planning for that, months in advance. Don't just cut over because you set yourself a goal. Well, we set ourselves a goal of July 1st and we're doing it no matter what. And I feel like that, that approach, and we've taken that approach before in other places. And as a consultant, we saw that all the time. They just set themselves a deadline and they just kill themselves to hit that number. And sometimes it's, yes, we want to get the software implemented, but we want to do it correctly. And we don't want to just rush and turn something on that's not necessarily ready to go. So it is important that you go back and you talk to your, executive management team and everybody else and just keep them apprised of where that go live date is. And if that go live date has to move, move it. It is better to move the go live date than to have a bad go live, because the taste in people's mouth is going to be hard to get out if you have a bad go live. It's better to delay it a little bit longer and then have a great go live than it is to rush into something that you're not ready for, or particularly if your users are not ready, your education is lacking. You go through conference room pilot and it doesn't go well. Don't just turn it on because you said you would, right?
So Jose, after the BPR, we start to get into some education. We start to have we haven't scoped out the project typically. It's the difference between Epicor's signature methodology and the way I like to run my projects. I don't really like to do the full project scope until I get out of education, because I feel that the teams I'm working with are not educated enough on Epicor, and they don't know the opportunities they have to really create a project scope at that point. And so I feel out of education, they start to learn the opportunities that are available to them. And then they have a better path forward and a clearer picture of what they want to do. So we may write up a quick outline and a potential scope, which is completely, going to be redone after we get to education, and full knowing that. Okay. After education, I told you we're on the pilot stage and we're testing out that design, right? So we're going to build out Epicor. We buy handheld scanners and barcode printers and all that stuff, and we kind of have a template for our implementation now for the rest of our sites. But we're starting to build that out for them. We're going to make sure it's working. After we got a pilot, that's a critical stage in the project for me. When we go from pilot to the end user training phase, I don't want to move into end user training unless I know that the pilot's great. The software design is signed off by everybody, right? That's a crucial moment. That's where we're validating the go live date that we estimated earlier in the project. So early on was, okay, this is going to be about a 6-month, 7-month implementation. Let's look for, financially, do we have to close on a quarter? Is it a month end? Does it not matter? Right. So we're gonna get an estimated date out there, and we're gonna tell the team we're marching to that date. Nothing gets things done like a due date. If you don't have a date assigned to your project end, you don't really have a project. Okay, that's literally the definition of a project. It's got an end date, right? You have a goal.
Right.
So we march to that date. Coming out of pilot before we go to end user training, we're doing basically a readiness assessment as far as, are we going to be able to make that date based on what we've designed out, what we scoped, is it built, is it ready? I don't move over to training users until I know it's going to be ready to go, because I don't want to train them on anything that's going to be changed. And I also don't want there to be any project delays and train them and have a 3-month gap. We're going to have to retrain them. You're going to lose ground there. Okay, it's a waste of time. So coming out of pilot, we're going to validate that go live date, and then we should really have some pretty good marching orders to get through end user training and then final acceptance testing. And like you said, if there is a reason that you need to change course and change that date, you always can and you should. If your team isn't ready, don't do it. Don't do it based on the date. If you have to move it, move it. It can be disastrous for a company. I was talking to someone last week about an ERP implementation that it shut down their company for a week. Nothing was built, shipped, no orders entered. They shut down for a week. That's a disaster. That's a disaster. We don't accept that. That's just a disaster. So avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, something like that is definitely not acceptable. So I like what you said about having a date that you're marching towards, but be flexible if you need to be. Don't just hold yourself
Right.
to that if you have no,
And I don't like to
if
introduce
you're
it
not
as a
ready.
soft date. I let the project team know that that's an achievable date. We
Yeah.
should be able to make that as a group, and And if we have to move that, it shouldn't feel good, right?
Sure. No, I completely understand. And I get that. Like you said, if you don't give them a goal, if you don't give your team a goal, it's hard to push them in the right direction.
Exactly.
Um, that's great. Um, what about upgrade testing? Is that any different? Do you see that any different than a regular implementation
Upgrade
testing?
testing is a little different. And so typically, upgrade testing means that you've been using the software for some period of time and you've had a successful implementation, hopefully, or recovered from whatever needed to be corrected there. But we're going to go with the successful implementation approach. So you have software in place. You should have end user procedures in place. Really, hopefully, you've been documenting your development work and everything that you do. Jose, your team is absolutely fantastic about this. This couldn't be better, and it's also visible to anybody who wants to look up a customization. So, who requested it? Why is it there? The business case, any of the elements that are involved. That also helps us not overwrite things and make changes to dashboards and BAQs and things like that affect other reports. So it's great that you have all that. I typically like to take, if we're going to do an upgrade from, I think we went from 10.2.500 to Kinetic 2021 earlier this year. What we did was we took our end user procedures and developed a testing plan off of that, and we tested against those end user procedures. Now, we keep those end user procedures up to date. When we make a change coming out of anything that your team is making a change based on something that the user base has asked for, we'll update our EUPs, and they should always be up to date. Another trick with keeping your EUPs up to date is when you hire and onboard new employees, I like to take the EUPs and put them in front of them during their training session, and guess what their task is? Learning Epicor and the processes involved, and also making notes in the EUPs. And not just haphazardly making changes in there, but they don't know Epicor, they don't know your process, and that should be a guide that helps them learn and keeps them on the path of conducting transactions or running reports and reading information from your system. Have them update the EUPs. It's a great opportunity. So if we've done a couple of process changes but didn't go back to the EUPs and update them, you're training those people to those new processes. Let's make sure that they update the EUPs. They can make notes in there, they can retype them, whatever. That's a great opportunity because you're sitting there and you're validating them anyway. Keep those up to date. Your software testing plan can be done off of your EUPs. These are important critical paths through Epicor for us to continue to make sure these processes work, and the team should be able to do that. You could just grab a bunch of users, power users, and have them test against the EUPs in the new software and have them flush out anything, report any bugs.
I love that idea. I love the idea of having somebody come on board and have them be responsible to make sure that those EUPs are up to date. My wife just recently got a new job, and so the first thing they did is they just handed her all the EUPs, and they're like, "Here, go learn." Right? And if she ran into the same problem, she was testing something, she was doing something, and all of a sudden that button wasn't there that was supposed to be there because their UPs were out of date. And so it was a great opportunity for them to say, "Oh, yeah, we got to update that documentation because it's not right." And so they walked her through the correct process, updated the UPs, and now the next person who comes on board has the right instructions. So it's also free. I mean, relatively, right? And you don't have to get a full-time person whose job is to make sure that every UP, is up to date. Yeah, you do it through your training process. You do it as part of your onboarding process, and they're always up to date. So that's actually a very clever approach to that also saves money and resources in the
Yeah,
long
there's
run.
some great tools out there. Epicor has something called Knowledge Mentor, which does like the teach me, train me, test me, guide me functions, and does all that. And it basically you video record and it highlights things, and it can walk them through the software, and then it can validate that they know. They come back to it later. They walk through and say, "Sorry, you clicked the wrong area. Try it again." So Knowledge Mentor is out there. Active Presenter is a program that we like to use too. That's very, very similar, and probably a more attractive price point. So you take a look at that. I don't like to use Microsoft Word for these things. It's really hard to edit them later. So I've kind of switched over to PowerPoint for any of those static EUPs that I've written up. It just kind of keeps the pages in line, and you're dropping in new graphics. It doesn't move everything around and split the pages up. So pick a path on how you want to deploy those and pass them out to people. Just make sure that they know where they are. They're accessible. We have everything put on our SharePoint site. It's supposedly easy to find. We're actually developing a new SharePoint site to make that even easier. And so we need to have an Epicor training center. Make sure you have an onboarding program for new employees. And then your software testing will be easy if all that is up to date, like we said.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. This is why you're doing our stuff, Bryan, because
Well,
you know what you're doing. And, it's really nice to be able to, get through the end of implementation and then you show the results, right? Show the difference. And that's something that's important too is, have clear metrics, right? You've mentioned this before, is have clear metrics of what you're trying to accomplish so that at the end you can show that you did what you said you were going to do, right? You improved, whether that's an improvement in the process itself or whether it's a simply improvement on the amount of data or the availability of that data. One of the things that's huge for our company is that, we were heavily paper-based, and we didn't have a way to do quick reporting, right? We need to do reporting on labor. We need to do reporting on billables. It takes a long time to do that when you don't have a single centralized source of truth. So having clear metrics in the end, um, I think it's hugely important, and it just makes it easy to show the value of the software you just implemented
absolutely.
too.
Some of those long-running queries and reports and things like that, break down the old stopwatch. I mean, that's what you and I actually did on a few things at some point, and see, this actually does
Yeah,
run faster, right? So going through that and looking at some of these kinetic
right.
screens and how they load compared to some of the other screens, it's one thing to throw out there that's faster, but if it doesn't feel faster, the users they're gonna call you out on it and say, you know what, you're just feeding us lines on this stuff. So keep them engaged by giving them some real improvements, some real metrics on that, and keep them engaged.
Yeah, and like you say, explain your decisions. If there's something that isn't objectively faster, explain why that's still better, right? It could be that it takes longer to enter the job, but you get X, Y, Z out of it that you didn't used to get. So yes, you can't just, click three buttons and enter a job, but if you do it correctly, you can now get these beautiful metrics out of it. You can start looking at efficiency. You can look at real cost over time. I mean, there's a lot of benefits that you can gain from implementing a system, even if it isn't just physically the system is faster. You can end up being faster in the long run. That was something that we actually learned through the pandemic when we went from paper-based to paperless, right? All our users had to be trained on how to use a system. Um, and a lot of them were very worried about we can't keep up with volume. We have very large volume business, as Stephen Gould. And so they thought they would not be able to keep up because they had to do all this manual data entry. Uh, but several months into it, we started taking actual measurements of how we were doing, and it turns out that even though it technically takes longer than writing on a piece of paper, we actually improved significantly our throughput and outputs because of all the other benefits of not having to physically walk a piece of paper across to the other side of the building and things like that you didn't account for because you've been doing it for
Yeah,
so
our
long.
average days to pay, our average days to bill, those are all metrics that we kept before and
Right.
after the implementation, number of invoices processed per day. And these metrics are sent out to our teams monthly. These are sent out across the board company wide, and we're seeing these dramatic improvements there. The other thing that you're kind of alluding to with some of this switching over from a paper system, one of the challenges we had was, a paper-based system, you have the eraser button. So it's like, hey, I can just go back and I can change, job reported quantity and things like that. And oh, sorry, that should have been 5 instead of 15 and things like that. And it's really easy to correct those mistakes after the fact. And Epicor required us to have a lot of that data entered upfront, right? It's real time, and we're issuing materials to jobs, and we're using the handheld scanners and PCIDs and lot tracking, all these complex things, which are really easy when you have a nice workflow to it. But train the team on doing things upfront and spending the time to repair that transaction was different for them. And why do I have to spend all this much time doing this? But then on the back end, they had much less to track, inventory track to Excel in some cases and things like that for certain customer projects where Epicor just tracks that out of the box, right? Like you ship something and your inventory is reduced. No going back and updating things later. And the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month was much simpler for them. And they realized that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like they had a little pain up front, but the gains on the back end are huge. The fact that you have automatic inventory now, you can just click a button and you know exactly what you have, where it is in the warehouse, when did it get there, how much did it cost. Before it was all, well, sure, let me go to the filing cabinet and pull out a piece of paper that, like you said, that has three different white outlines on it with different numbers on it and trying to figure out, well, I think it costs $10 or 11, right? And it's one of those things where yes, it was painful, but the outcome is so significant and so much better in the end that it's like day and night for sure. Awesome. Thank you so much for talking to me a little bit about that. I know that I really enjoyed the presentation that you did at Insights, and I wanted to, kind of cover some of those topics for the rest of the people that maybe didn't make it to Insights. I know that was an awesome presentation, and we've been saying all along that Epicor should record these and put them out. And obviously, that's not something they're doing right now, but hopefully through this podcast we can start doing some of that. We can bring in some other people, other customers, and showcase their solutions and talk about how they're
Yep.
solving real world problems really, because it's very nice. We always kind of make fun of it internally about the Epicor demo database, and it's got the same 17 records and the couple hundred orders in there that have been there since like the 1980s. But it's not real world, right? Real world examples. You're talking about real data, real people, real humans, real mistakes. So it's really nice when customers are the ones doing the teaching because they're talking from experience, right? They're not talking from buying the sky perfect software standpoint, right? They're talking about real work, and it just makes a
Yeah,
huge difference
absolutely.
when you look
So
at it from
yeah,
that
happy
standpoint, I
to
think.
run through a couple of those points from the presentation. And as far as the recording of those go, I think Epicor reached out and they asked me to re-record the session with them for the virtual summit that they put out, usually a few months after Epicor, after Insights. So I think they want to re-record the session, and there's a few others that they want to do, and they were going to reach out to some of that customer base to do some of those for the virtual summits. So I'm happy to do that, and when that finally gets published, well, we can send out links for everybody to go watch it.
Yeah, sounds great. And I think that's coming up maybe in the next month or two. I think I've heard some rumblings about their
Yeah,
virtual
great.
summit coming up pretty soon. So awesome. And we're going to try to get a couple of guests lined up for the next time. I know we've already talked to John Priddich, like you mentioned. We've talked to Stephen Edgington, who coincidentally just got promoted.
Congratulations, Stephen.
So congratulations to him.
Well deserved.
Pretty great news. Yeah, they're pretty great. Exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say pretty great get there from the Epicor team. Very smart. So we're looking forward to talking to some of them. And yeah, anyway, so let's wrap it up for today,
Thanks, Jose.
and
Appreciate it.
I'll talk to you next time.